I didn't doubt about playing and fighting toe-to-toe with Jannik on indoor court.
You think you know how this story ends. Carlos Alcaraz gets healthy, comes back, picks up right where he left off, and the rivalry with Jannik Sinner rolls on like nothing happened. Wrong. And so is almost everyone who's been telling you that. Because while Carlos sat on the sidelines with a busted wrist, Sinner didn't just keep winning, he took something. Something specific. Something that, depending on how you look at it, Carlos Alcaraz may never get back. And this week, the one man who'd understand exactly what that feels like finally broke his silence on it. Rafael Nadal. Now here's where I challenge you. Most channels will sell you one of two lies. Either Carlos is finished, cooked, a fading star eclipsed by the relentless robot from South Tyrol, or they'll tell you none of it matters, he's fine, relax. Both takes are garbage. The truth sits in the uncomfortable middle, and it's far more interesting than either. Sinner really has taken something enormous. The numbers are brutal, and they're real. But what Nadal said about it flips the entire doom narrative on its head. And it comes from a man who lost more to injury than Carlos ever has, then came back and won anyway. So stick with me. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you three things. Exactly what Sinner took while Carlos was hurt, with the cold stats behind every word. The one thing that's genuinely gone for good, that no comeback ever recovers, and why Rafael Nadal, of all people, looked at this wreckage and refused to count Carlos out. By the end, you won't see this rivalry the same way, and you definitely won't buy the lazy take that Alcaraz is done. He's not done, but he did lose something. Let me show you what. Let's start with what Sinner actually took, because it's staggering. While Carlos was getting his wrist scanned, Jannik Sinner went on a run that rewrote the record book. 6 straight Masters, 1,000 titles. The first man in history to do it. 5 Masters in a single season, also a first. He completed the career Golden Masters, all 9 Masters events won, a feat only a handful of legends have ever managed. He swept the Sunshine Double, Indian Wells and Miami, without dropping a single set. And somewhere in there, he passed a Djokovic record for consecutive sets won at that level. This wasn't a hot streak, this was a coronation. Sinner didn't just win in 2026, he dismantled the tour. Rory McIlroy, watching from the golf world, called him an absolute robot who doesn't make a mistake. That's the engine behind the numbers. A machine that punishes every error and never hands a free point back. Against that, even great players drown. Carlos, healthy, is the one man who consistently out-chaoses the machine. But Carlos wasn't healthy. And hold that thought, because the most damning number in this whole story isn't a trophy count. The throne came with it. Sinner reclaimed world number 1 in April and has now piled up around 75 weeks at the top, one of the longest reigns of the modern era. But the most brutal number is the swing. Rewind to early February. Carlos Alcaraz led these rankings, ahead of Sinner by more than 3,000 points. Today, Sinner sits on roughly 13,500 points. Carlos has under 10,000. The lead didn't just change hands, it flipped by nearly 7,000 points in 4 months. And the last time these two actually played, in the Monte Carlo final, it was Sinner who won, taking his first big clay title on Carlos's favorite surface. Sinner didn't nudge ahead. He sprinted into the distance while his rival stood frozen. That's the cruelest detail. Sinner built most of this lead while Carlos couldn't lift a racket. If you want the honest breakdown of what that actually costs a player, not the hype, not the panic, the real math, hit subscribe, because this next part is the one nobody wants to say out loud. Here's the thing Sinner took that Carlos truly can't get back. It isn't the ranking. Rankings flip, points reset, all of that is recoverable. It's the time. Carlos is 23, dead in the heart of his prime, and the wrist erased half a season of it. The clay swing he owns? He watched it from a couch. Rome and Roland Garros, 2 titles he was defending, slipped away without him hitting a ball. Then the grass took Queens and Wimbledon too. Months of a peak that doesn't come around twice, simply deleted. You can win a ranking back. Nobody wins back the calendar. That's the loss that's genuinely permanent. And no comeback, however brilliant, ever returns it. Picture Carlos through all of it. Sidelined, watching his rival hoist trophy after trophy on a screen. He showed up to the Laureus Awards to collect Sportsman of the Year with a brace strapped to his right wrist. honored for last season while the new one slipped through his fingers. There's no stat for that kind of helplessness. The best player on the planet reduced to a spectator at the exact moment his greatest rival caught fire. Worse still, Sinner isn't even done piling on. He's the reigning Wimbledon champion and the heavy favorite to win it again in a few weeks on grass, while Carlos watches from home. Every trophy Sinner lifts during this injury stretches a gap that's already a canyon. The math isn't slowing down for Carlos. It's actively running away from him. So is that it? Is the kid finished? A cautionary tale before he even turns 24? That's exactly what the Doom crowd wants you to believe. And it's exactly where Rafael Nadal walked in and torched the whole narrative. Because this week, Nadal broke his silence on Carlos, and he didn't bury him, he backed him. He'll come back strong after the injury, Nadal said. He's too good for it not to be that way. And consider the source. The greatest comeback artist tennis has ever seen. A man who lost entire years to ruined knees, a torn wrist, an abdominal tear, a hip, looked at Carlos's situation and saw a detour, not a dead end. Nadal once abandoned a French Open mid-tournament with a wrist injury, got written off more times than anyone can count, and came back to win major after major. When that man tells you Carlos returns strong, you listen. Nadal's gone further on the rivalry itself. He's refused, flatly, to call it settled. 2 Grand Slams each, he pointed out, number 1 and number 2 in the world. They're creating their own story. Not Sinner's story, theirs. To Nadal, this isn't a takeover, it's chapter 1 of a fight that's barely started. The man who lived the Federer and Djokovic wars is telling you not to crown anyone yet. And here's the irony nobody mentions. The best evidence that Carlos comes back from this? Sinner himself. Barely a year ago, Jannik served a 3-month suspension, banned from the tour entirely, then came back to seize the number 1 ranking and the historic season we just walked through. If a layoff didn't break Sinner, why would it break the one man with a winning record against him? Comebacks aren't a theory in this sport, they're the rule. Now the part that should end this debate. For all of Sinner's 2026 fireworks, he still hasn't taken the one thing that decides a rivalry, the head-to-head. The rankings, Sinner's. The Masters, Sinner's. The head-to-head, still Carlos's, 10 wins to 7, let that land. Sinner can hoard every trophy on the calendar, but when these two stand across the net, Carlos has beaten him more often than not. The only scoreboard that truly settles this rivalry is the one Sinner still isn't winning. Here's the number the doomed take never mentions. Grand Slam titles. Carlos has 7, Sinner has 4. For all the Masters and all the weeks at number 1, the currency that actually defines greatness, majors, still belongs to Alcaraz, and it isn't close, 7-4. The kid being written off has nearly double the slams of the man supposedly burying him. There's more Sinner hasn't touched. This very season before the injury, it was Carlos who won the Australian Open, completing the career Grand Slam as the youngest man in history, breaking a record that had stood since 1938. It was Carlos who beat Sinner in the 2025 French Open final, a 5.5-hour war for the ages. And Roland Garros? Still the one major missing from Sinner's entire collection, he went out in the second round this year. The clay, the French, the head-to-head, the heart of what makes Carlos great, Sinner hasn't laid a finger on. And remember why that head-to-head looks the way it does. When Carlos is healthy, he's the one style on earth that cracks the machine. The 2025 French Open final is the proof. 5 hours and 29 minutes. Sinner serving for the title with 3 championship points in his hand, and Carlos clawed out of every one of them to win. That wasn't luck. That's the single player who turns Sinner's precision into a problem he can't solve. Sinner took the ranking. He never took Carlos. So let's be honest about what's true. Sinner took the number 1 ranking for now. He took a chunk of Carlos's prime that the calendar will never hand back. That part of the title is real, and it stings. But the rivalry, the ceiling, the future, those were never Sinner's to take. And the head-to-head, the trophy cabinet, and Rafael Nadal himself all say so. Which voice wins, Nadal's faith or the cold math? Here's what actually decides it. If Carlos comes back, stays healthy, and beats Sinner when it counts, in majors and big finals, the lost season becomes a footnote and the rivalry roars right back. If the wrist lingers, if the rust clings, if Sinner keeps stacking slams while Carlos chases, then the gap Nadal waved off becomes the whole story. It isn't written yet, that's the entire point. Better yet, the next chapter could come fast. Carlos is targeting a return for the US hardcourt swing in August, the surface where he's the defending US Open champion. If he's back and sharp by then, the rematch everyone wants is months away, not years. The lead Sinner built in an empty room gets tested the second Carlos walks back into the arena. The Doom merchants want a funeral. What they've actually got is an intermission. Sinner grabbed the lead while the lights were off. The question was never whether Carlos comes back. Nadal already answered that. The question is what he does when the racket's finally back in his hand, healthy, rested, and hunting everything Sinner borrowed. Where does that leave us? Sinner took the ranking. He took the weeks at number 1, the Masters records, the whole spring, and he took something Carlos genuinely can't reclaim, the months of a prime that don't come back. That's real. The title isn't lying about that part, but everything it implies underneath, that Carlos is finished, that the rivalry's over, that Sinner's already won the war, falls apart the second you check the facts. Carlos still leads the head-to-head 10-7. Carlos still has 7 Grand Slams to Sinner's 4. Carlos still won the Australian Open and the career Grand Slam this very year. And Rafael Nadal, the greatest comeback story tennis has ever produced, looked at this exact moment and refused to count him out. So here's the real question, and I want your answer. Two voices are telling you two different stories. The numbers say Sinner's running away and the gap is permanent. Nadal says Carlos comes back strong because he's too good not to. One of them gets proven right. Which is it? Do you trust Nadal, the man who lived this exact comeback, or the cold math of the rankings? Drop one word below. Nadal, if you believe Carlos reclaims everything. Numbers, if you think Sinner's lead is the new forever. I'll pin the best argument from each side. And if you want the honest version of these stories, the one that checks the stats instead of screaming the scariest headline, subscribe. We don't do funerals for players who are still winning. Sinner took the lead. Nadal says Carlos takes it back. Place your bet.